Community integration, while diversely defined, is a term encompassing the full participation of all people in community life. It has specifically referred to the integration of people with disabilities into U.S. society from the local to the national level, and for decades was a defining agenda in countries such as Great Britain. In the U.S., the Consortium of Citizens for Disabilities advocates for a national public policy which ensures the self-determination, independence, empowerment, integration and inclusion of children and adults with disabilities in all parts of society. Other countries with different roots often spoke of inclusion, the unifying global agenda in disability and community life theory. Theorists have differentiated types and levels of integration in special education as physical, functional, social, community and organizational. In disability circles, community integration meant opportunities for participation in schools, careers, homes, relationships, leisure, and a variety of interests and lifestyles. Bengt Neye and the late Wolf Wolfensberger of the U.S. are internationally known for the concept of normalization and social role valorization, with a particular emphasis on physical and social integration. Anders Gustafsson of Sweden has indicated that physical integration best describes the common use of the term integration, with social integration the struggle for equality and quality in life. The intent of community integration was the participation of people with disabilities in regular environments, the antithesis of exclusionary practices. As the field moved toward community support, theories related to community living began to require applicability beyond a minority group model, with a new emphasis on self-determination. As described by Raj Eno, these theories include ecological theory, community support theories, systems theory, feminist theories, family theories, socio-cultural theories, critical theories in education, psychosocial theories, the generic human concept theory and universal theories. Systems change. Taylor, in his analysis of community systems in the U.S., proposed the principle of non-restrictive environment as a counterpoint to the federal government's least restrictive environment principle. In 2014, the governing principle in the U.S. is that of the most integrated setting based upon the Supreme Court Olmstead decision. Prior to the Olmstead decision, the Supreme Court addressed the community integration issues multiple times in the case Haldeman v. Pennhurst State School and Hospital, a class action filed in Pennsylvania by attorney David Furliger. Although the Olmstead decision explicitly did not reach the constitutional issues decided in the Pennhurst and other cases, limitations in Olmstead have been critiqued, and it has been argued that there is a constitutional right to community services. The analysis of large-scale systems change in community integration has involved challenges by local public agencies. Key elements of these strategies and its implications for national policy. Disability agency, state-level disability system. Community and societal change are essential elements of the process and outcomes of community integration. Community integration also has strong community roots, which places it in community practice fields, from community psychology to sociologists studying community, to inclusive education in local school systems, competitive businesses, rural independent living, urban sociology, local parks and recreation programs, community development and housing, neighborhoods and communities, among others. Educational integration has a long history of debate, described as more comprehensive than academic mainstreaming. Community integration in this context refers to opportunities to learn practical social and community living skills in a wide variety of community settings. based in part on the civil rights movement as represented by Brown v. Board of Education. School integration was based on the right to a free, appropriate education in regular schools and classrooms. Educational integration remains controversial in the U.S. due, in part, to special education systems. School integration also involves children with more significant disabilities, such as those with technology-assisted needs. Progress has been made in education at the post-secondary level due, in part, to disability services departments at colleges. Today, instead of educational integration, the goal is for continued school reform through inclusion and for education with accommodations as required by the law. Housing. In the U.S. disability field, a major shift has occurred from group and facility-based models to homes with support services, emphasizing a change from home-like housing to community homes, neighborhoods and relationships. The most recent initiatives were in home ownership, an important form of community integration which also involves a feeling of ownership. Housing integration builds on a long history of support for good quality, affordable housing which often include analyses of social exclusion which may concentrate on U.S. protected classes. Housing integration is of great importance, in part, because of the history of residential segregation in the U.S. Residential segregation due to inequality and disparity continues to be studied in ethnic, social and economic frameworks, including the process of desegregation, gentrification and hypersegregation. In addition, redlining, as a bridge issue across lower and middle classes, affects housing and neighborhood integration from as early as the 1970s, with gerrymandering districts for community development funds more common in the 2000s. A discussion of residential segregation in US and Europe and a critique of the ideal of integration can be found in Inclusion and Democracy. In the US, mixed income and scattered site housing was reported in a case study of a housing association supporting people with disabilities in Madison, Wisconsin. In Canada, the Prairie Housing Cooperative integrates persons with disabilities into the community via housing. An early review on non-profit housing in the U.S. and Canada, with increasing governmental funds in the U.S. today, indicates that mixed-income housing was used primarily in troubled neighborhoods, with efforts to seek higher-income tenants to move into those neighborhoods as opposed to raising the entire group's living standards. In 2013, the emphasis is on inclusive and sustainable housing, while other groups support equitable and sustainable housing in the U.S. The status of housing and disability in America was reported by the National Council on Disability in the U.S., and compared to Harvard University's report on the nation's housing. Recreation. Being in the community has meant being part of activities and events on the local level in towns, cities and suburbs. Recreational integration is a facet of inclusion and community access. School and recreation integration was promoted in the U.S. and in countries such as Canada and Australia. On the local level, concerns have generally concerned acceptance and friendships, support services, site accessibility, group size, and truly integrated activities. For example, in Great Britain, community opportunities were sought so people could belong, contribute and make friends. In addition, recreational funding has often been tied to facilities. Community integration involves changes in staffing of regular community environments such as the YMCA. By 2013, at least one academic recreation and tourism department had an inclusion adaptive educator as its departmental chair supporting integration and inclusion. Recreational inclusion may entail a camp, a neighborhood center, a girls' softball league, school sports or technology clubs, a community choir or a public speaking course as participation in a social world and integration. Car Car-related examples include an amusement park, car track, car shows, bike nights and car cruisings, and model car racing. Employment integration was advocated during the 1970s for women, people with disabilities and racial groups who were seen as discriminated against in employment. For example, occupations and professions were constructed based upon gender. Women's professions and men's professions. Progress has been made at the leadership level with the first African American president. Disability leadership in the United States Department of Education and the rise of prominent women in the State Department. For those with severe disabilities, employment integration initiatives were often framed as supported employment, which allowed jobs at regular businesses and employment sites. Similar initiatives in the mental health field were often called transitional employment, and other forms of integration included competitive placements in businesses and industry, targeted positions, and even affirmative businesses in the hearts of business districts. A major success was the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, amended in 2008, which provided protection for men and women with disabilities in obtaining jobs, careers and positions with necessarily workplace accommodations. A key service for employment integration is often considered to be personal assistance services, or in other fields a job coach, prior to more natural models of supervision and support. In this context, employment integration has been conceptualized, including social aspects of promotion, discriminatory hiring and termination practices, performance standards, job sharing and modification, educational attainment, internships and volunteer experiences, workplace relationships, team building, supervisory roles, workers' compensation, accommodations and supports. Competitive employment integration at the U.S. workplace is expected by law, and categorical services have tended to be developed as segregated bases. Employment integration is a worldwide issue, modified by approaches to multicultural groups, the changing economy and increasing unemployment policies. Community integration has been most criticized for its inattention to gender, ethnic, cultural, racial, class and economic factors. At the university level, multiculturalism, including disability, was proposed as the solution to these complex issues. Community integration, in practice, involves diverse approaches and models and has been integral to deinstitutionalization and community development for over 2 decades. Community integration is a policy, concept and practice to address systemic stigma and discrimination related to disability. It competes with other policy models and changes its practices over time. Cross-disability. In the subfield of brain injury, community integration included areas ranging from supported employment to daily living skills, family interventions and memory training, school reintegration and transition to post-secondary education. Community integration was being diversely defined by researchers, including those in fields such as brain injury, sensory impairments, developmental and physical disabilities. News and professional journal articles will often read "integration into the community, integrated care," or community reintegration worldwide. In the field of mental health, Paul Carling promoted community integration in the 1980s and 1990s in opposition to the predominant medical model, while psychiatric rehabilitation also linked to the medical, often allied health professions. Carling's approach to community integration in mental health was congruent with intellectual disabilities, particularly in areas of community living. Comprehensive medical systems were proposed to support the family in community integration, including new roles for specialized personnel from neuropsychologists to physiatrists. In the field of traumatic brain injury, Community integration was framed by both the social and medical models of disability in an effort to transition people from hospitals and rehabilitation centers. Today, the Brain Injury Association of America recommends the educational needs of children with traumatic brain injuries and the health care required. U.S. federal initiative. In 1985, the U.S. government funded a national community integration project identifying best community practices for people with the most severe disabilities. Technical assistance was funded through the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Community Integration to all states. The Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Community Integration also had subcontracts with the University of Illinois, the University of Minnesota Institute on Community Integration and others. The principles of community integration through the national flagship centers were: all people with disabilities will be able to live successfully in natural communities that provide them the supports they need. All people with disabilities will be recognized for the positive contributions they make to the families and communities. All people with disabilities will benefit from enduring relationships with other people. All people with disabilities will be entitled to participate in decisions affecting the nature and quality of services they receive. All people with disabilities will have access to services and supports that provide choice and support full citizenship. Services and supports for people with disabilities will be individualized and responsive to cultural and ethnic differences, economic resources and life circumstances. Public policy will provide the opportunity to enjoy productive, integrated lives. The 1988 Leadership Institute on Community Integration, held in Washington, D.C., was sponsored by the Research and Training Center on Community Integration in cooperation with the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, U.S. Department of Education, Beach Center on Families and Disability, California Research Institute, Rehabilitation Research and Training Center, Research and Training Center Consortium on Aging and Developmental Disabilities, Research and Training Center on Community Living and the university-affiliated Program in Developmental Disabilities. Work groups were facilitated in community living, families, school and employment with papers prepared, respectively, by K. Charlie Lacan and P. Turnbull and H. Rudd Turnbull, Douglas Beiklin and Paul Wayman. By the late 2000s, the centers were renamed to Community Participation, one aspect of community integration, or to employment, or other priority areas, such as health, with many of the above centers still federally funded through the NIDR program. U.S. Department of Education and new academic centers at universities such as Temple University in Pennsylvania. Principles and practices, in particular, community integration in intellectual, severe disabilities and developmental disabilities means families for all children. For adults, it means ordinary or regular homes with support services. In addition, community integration means recreation, employment, transportation and education with the personal assistance and support necessary to participate fully in the community. However, community support as part of community agency change and deinstitutionalization, self-determination, community participation, individual planning, social relationships and personal assistance services became the leading directions in U.S. community integration. Community integration has been tied to quality assurance in the community and an improved quality of life. It has involved evaluations and studies over at least 2 decades in areas ranging from service costs to personnel studies, service typologies, best practices and innovations, community and integration studies. Internationally, quality of life has been explored in Finland, Australia, the US, Germany, Hungary, Denmark and Canada. Global perspectives. Researchers in the US and Great Britain collaborated on community integration, including a 1990 series of international seminars on community integration in the US held at the University of Manchester, Manchester Polytechnic and Manchester Health Authority, the King's Fund College, Campaign for the Mentally Handicapped, University of Wales at Bangor, and the University of Wales. Internationally, research began on the first integrated generation in countries such as Sweden, and integration was confirmed as a legal principle in the US. Community services, supports, integration and inclusion are changing in countries such as Czechoslovakia, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Israel, Austria, Great Britain, Iceland and Sweden. Since the 1990s, the European Union has formed. Populations in the Middle East have been emancipated. Community self-advocacy has developed in South America and Africa, and financial ownership of U.S. debt has been undertaken by China. The United Nations offers guidance and leadership through its Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. New book based on these principles is Public Administration and Disability, Community Services Administration in the U.S., which links to the diverse nation-states and rationales for continuing educational, employment and housing segregation in Northern Ireland.